Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. If nobody heard that, make sure to leave a comment letting me know that you couldn't hear that. Right after I made a video is a good time to do a live stream, right? That's like the traditional thing to do. I feel like it would make more sense if it had been a... I should talk a little louder. It's not a main channel video, but I'm still rather proud of it. I think it came out nicely. Lingo Lizard says, can't hear because I'm out in public, but hi. Hi, Lingo Lizard. A little bit ago, I thought to myself, like, what time of day should I do the next live stream? And I decided, wouldn't it be funny if I used a random number generator to pick a random time of day, and then I streamed at that time. And I used the random number generator, and it picked 10 a.m. It is currently 11:40 a.m. my time, but I had planned on doing this at 10 a.m. my time, and didn't quite work out that way. Which is a big reason I don't announce when I'm gonna do these streams in advance, because I think if I tried to do that, I literally wouldn't be able to. Who else but Zane says, I think what they meant to type was, is it weird that sometimes the lack of choice can be a relief? Not entirely sure what that's in reference to, but I don't think that's weird at all. Like, isn't this like a well-studied thing, like choice paralysis, or the tyranny of choice, I think it's been called? It's like if there's 2 or 3 different types of bread at the grocery store, then like... then you feel happy. If there's only one type of bread at the grocery store, then you're like, huh, I hope this bread is okay. If there's 2 or 3 types of bread, then you're like, oh cool, I have some options. But if there's 50 types of bread, then it's like, fuck, do I have to like look through all of these types of bread? And you probably just get fed up and buy the first thing you see. I think I've heard people say that that's like part of the appeal of authoritarianism too. That like a strong man who comes along and says, hey, you won't have to do politics, you won't have to pick who to vote for anymore because there won't be voting anymore. Like that's kind of a impressive sell for some people. Got a lot of very amusing comments on the video I did recently. What did I title it? I kept futzing with the title until the last minute, so I forget what I wound up calling it. Like, Anarchy, Corporate Responsibility, and Murder? No, it was the other way around. It was Murder. Because I remember that the chapter titles were the reverse of the title. Geometry says, I'm not an anarchist, but I find anarchism interesting. Okay. A whole lot of people, and by a whole lot of people, I mean like, I don't know, 3 or 4? Handful of people were telling me, like, hey, learn more about anarchism. Like, read anarchist theory, or like meet some real-life anarchists and talk to them. And fucking, I don't think anybody understood that, like, I did not pack every single thing I know about anarchism into that video. Like, you know, I'm no expert on anarchist theory, but I read the bread book, the Conquest of Bread by Bakunin or Bookchin. I get the Russian anarchists whose names start with B mixed up with each other. Point is that people call breadtube, right? Like the leftist communist YouTube is often called breadtube. It's called that because of the bread book, because of the conquest of bread, which apparently, I don't know, I don't know why we wound up naming it after that particular book, but like, I have engaged with anarchist theory much more deeply than I was letting on in that video, because that video was kind of for normies. Like, I made that video because I kept hearing these, like, such shitty fucking takes. Like, the takes I was hearing on political violence, and they were really, really getting under my skin. Like, it felt to me like there were only two camps out there. By the way, I am going to... Let's see. Who else but Zane says, can we invent a slur for anarchists? And Geometry says, there is anarchitty, but that doesn't sound that insulting, IMO. That's the first thing I thought of, too, anarchitty. I feel like it's quite... Like, I feel like it appropriately invokes the specter of anarchists who want to abolish bedtime. But yeah, like, there were lots of people bringing up... Okay, I made that video because part of the argument I wanted to make is that, like, I wanted to use the idea of anarchism that, like, mainstream liberals have in their minds, I guess. Like, the idea of anarchism where it's kind of synonymous with, like, civil war and, like, breakdown of social cohesion. Like when people call Somalia an anarchist society, like this is... they are not using the word anarchist in a way remotely similar to the way any self-described anarchist would use it. But unfortunately, that is the most common usage of the term anarchist. So, like, I don't know, I kind of wanted to make the argument that, like, hey, if there's, like, a loophole that's allowing people to commit social... Some people posted, like, the thing you're describing is there's a name for it, and it's social murder. It's murder that all of society participates in, so you can't really pin it on one person. And, like, correct, like, I didn't want to introduce new terminology, but a big point of the video was, in fact, to, like, explain the idea of social murder. But yeah, like... I have heard a lot of different definitions of anarchism over time. And I don't know. I've come to the tentative conclusion that trying to figure out, like, what exactly is my ideology and does it or doesn't it count as anarchist is a little bit of a waste of time. I have decided, A, that anarchists are cool and I kind of want to be in their club, and B, I might not actually be cool enough to be in their club. Basically, I hope that in the future, like, historians looking back... Like, okay, isn't it the case that Proudhon... How do you say his name out loud? Proudhon? Like, I know it's French, but I don't like French. I don't want to have to put on a phony French accent in order to say some guy's name. Let's see. Do I need shovels or do I need pickaxes? I'm not done. No, I'm gonna switch to pickaxes now. A little while ago, well, never mind. Shit. I packed too many pickaxes. Now the cobblestone has nowhere to go. Geometry says, to be frank, like 95% of leftist terms have 20 different definitions and connotations. I agree. Hello, well, it's not just leftist terms. It's like political terms in general. Like, we're still using terms like socialist and liberal and conservative terms that were, I think, made up in like the early 1800s or so. At the very least, I know socialist became a thing in like the early 1800s. And like, we're using these words in ways that have been like molded and changed over like a couple hundred years now of Resian says, wooden pickaxes? I know. Funny, ain't it? I don't know how these wooden pickaxes got into my inventory, but they just keep popping up in there. Every time I try to pick up a stone pickaxe, it just bursts into flames in my hands. I've been cursed by a witch to only ever be able to use wooden pickaxes. There are people in the comments saying that the real definition of anarchist is that you want to abolish unjust hierarchies. And it's like, fuck off, man. Everyone wants to abolish unjust hierarchies. We wouldn't call them... The tricky part is figuring out which hierarchies are unjust and which ones aren't. And then some anarchists are like, well... The Lollykitty says, why are you mining stone every stream? I don't know, why not? I like it's not even mining. I feel like mining implies that you're doing it for the sake of gathering the material. Like, there's nothing I want to do with all of this cobblestone. Like, I'm just doing what I'm doing for the sake of doing it. Astro asks, am I terraforming? I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what counts. Like, I'm terraforming in the sense that I am changing the landscape of my little Minecraft world, but I feel like everyone does that in Minecraft. Frankly, I kind of get the impression that the real reason a lot of anarchists self-identify as anarchist is because anarchist is a scary word, and they like being edgy. And I say that, like... My intellectual hero, David Graeber, self-identified as an anarchist, and he started self-identifying as an anarchist quite young. Like, some of the earliest interviews of him online are from, like, the 90s or, like, the early aughts or something. And he's... Hi, Lipa Monka. So, like, David Graeber... Like, he self-identified as an anarchist, and you can find times where he talks about it earlier in his life. But he doesn't really talk about it that much. Like, he doesn't really talk about, like, what does the word anarchist really mean? Why do I identify as anarchist? Like, it... Honestly, partly it seems like he identified as anarchist, at least in part because he seems to have had some anarchist friends and he wanted to fit in with them. Rezayan says anarchism does have a cool aesthetic, doesn't it? A little while ago, I learned... It's a little bit difficult for me to figure out if this is even true or not, but I read somewhere that the traditional anarchist symbol, the circle with the capital A inside, I heard someone somewhere say that originally it wasn't just a circle, it was a capital letter O. Apparently there was like a slogan that was like anarchy is order, and I actually really like that. Like, one of the things that made me way more sympathetic to anarchism and anarchists was I don't know, like seeing how much people. Oh shit. Geometry says, also, Zidnaf, do you have top chat or live chat on? I have top chat on, which is not what I want. I want to have live chat on. I have adjusted that setting right now. Juniper Berry says, I came in late. Why am I cranky at you? Oh, and then they immediately say, oh, that'd do it. Like, the point of the video was like, hey, the idea of anarchy you have in your head, where like people can kill each other and there's just no consequences for it, that's kind of already what we have. Like, that's already capitalism. Like, capitalists can already functionally get away with murder. So like the things you're scared of about anarchism are what we currently live in. Now, is that how we actually should use the word anarchy or anarchism? I don't fucking know. Like, I think there's room for reasonable people to disagree on that point. Like, especially like when I hear like really detailed. Every now and then, anarchists will sit down and try to be a little bit utopian and try to like come up with a sketch of what they want life to be like what an anarchist society as they would create it would be like what they imagine when they imagine like a good version of anarchy that they would implement. And I feel like I can't possibly be alone in looking at most of those plans and being like, that's just the government. Like, that's just a different. You're just talking about reforming the state. Like you're talking about creating institutions that would replace the functionality that the state currently serves, and you're saying and you're like, you are correct. You are changing the state such that it's very different from what it used to be. But like, how much can you change the state exactly before it's no longer a state? Like, how many pieces of the government can you take away or can you spin off into their own independent institution before the thing that's left doesn't even count as government anymore or doesn't even count as the state? And like, again, I don't think there's really an objective answer to that question, but also like I've heard anarchists propose that like instead of the police we should essentially have like rotating neighborhood watches that like everyone participates in, and that like and the notion is that like if you don't have this permanent body that's like separate from the rest of society that whose job it is to do all of the violence, then like sorry, lost my train of thought. So like anarchists if your definition of the state is that it needs to be like a separate group of people who are like professional violence inflictors, things like a permanent professional police force, and you want to abolish that, like I guess I can kind of see where you're coming from. I can see how that might be a useful definition of the state. But I feel like the rotating neighborhood watch that you're talking about, I feel like that's just a different kind of state. Like the ancient Romans, really early in the history of the Roman Republic, had they had like this universal conscription thing. Like all young men had to serve in the army, like without exception. And like that's a very different kind of army from the army that the United States of America has. But that doesn't mean it's not an army. That doesn't mean it's an entirely different kind of institution. Frankly, I might just be a Republican. Like, not Republican in the sense of voting for the Republican Party, but like small r Republican. Like Republican in the sense that I want a res publica. I want a state. I want a public state. I want a state that like everyone gets a fair say in. And like, you know, maybe not a state where everyone has exactly the same amount of control or influence in it, but like a state that in theory has its doors open to like critique from any direction, and where like a state where everyone who is governed by that state, like, has the opportunity to participate in the decision-making functions of that state. Like, I don't want to abolish the state. I just want it to, like, be better. Some people were saying, like, there was actually no, let me catch up on chat just a little bit. Juniper Berry says anarchists in general oppose hierarchy and want community self-rule. That's, as far as I can tell, true for most other anarchists I've encountered, even like ANCAPs. I'm not sure I'm opposed to hierarchy. It depends a whole lot on what you mean by hierarchy exactly. Like, David Graeber actually pointed this out, that, like, there's a lot of situations where hierarchy feels kind of unavoidable. So I think someone once asked him, like, what kinds of hierarchy are you okay with? Like, if there's a whole lot of hierarchy that you want to abolish or that you want to do away with, then, like, what kinds of hierarchy are okay? Are there any? And if I'm remembering right, what David Graeber said was that he's a really big fan of forms of hierarchy that are self-undermining, like forms of hierarchy that are, like, intrinsically temporary. The examples he gave were teachers and doctors. Teachers have authority over you on the grounds that they know more than you, and they are there to tell you. And the more you learn, the better a teacher they are, the faster you will get up to the point where they don't have anything to teach you anymore, and they can stop being your teacher and you can go somewhere else. Doctors have authority over you because they presumably know how to make you stop being sick. But doctors, like, the better they are at that, the faster you'll stop being sick and the faster you'll leave their office. See what I mean? Like these are forms of hierarchy that are intrinsically self-undermining. I feel like hierarchy is fine as long as it's, like, voluntary. Like, maybe I'm stretching the definition of hierarchy to be so broad that, like, anarchists would no longer accept the things I'm talking about as even counting as hierarchy anymore. But, like, I think people should have the freedom to form and break social relationships as they see fit. And if people really are free to do that, if people really are free to decide what sorts of social relationships they want to have with the people around them, some of them are going to be hierarchical, and I don't know, I kind of think that's okay. And as long as you can leave whenever you want and, like, end the relationship or renegotiate the relationship on different terms, then, like, I don't know, what's the issue? Juniper Berry said, so what you're saying is an issue a lot of non-anarchists run into, where you assume anarchist must be in opposition to, like, having any kind of social organization, but it never is that. See, part of the problem here, like most people who have spent some time studying linguistics, I have, like, an instinct towards descriptivism, like an instinct towards trying to study how people currently use words and not trying to tell them to do it differently, but just sort of rolling with it and being like, sure, I get, if people use the words this way, then I guess that's what the words mean. So what do you do? What do you do when the vast majority of people who speak English use the word anarchist to mean things that most self-described anarchists think is completely different from real anarchism? Like, who gets to decide what anarchy means? Anarchists or like the majority of the population? I think these terms are probably best used, like, in hindsight by historians. Like, historians looking back often identify certain political factions forming and like breaking apart and merging together, and it's all very interesting, and they will come up with labels to describe it. They will talk about there being a liberal faction and a conservative faction in a particular legislature, even if no one in that legislature would self-describe as a liberal or a conservative. Like these I think these terms are best used like from the outside looking in. So like yeah, I guess my point is like I don't want to self-describe as an anarchist because I feel like it creates more problems than it solves. It doesn't do a very good job of telling anyone anything about what I believe or why. But I do kind of hope that, like, in hindsight, people look at me and the kinds of people I like and the kinds of people I hang out with and ally with and, like, label me as an anarchist in hindsight. Like kind of like how you can look at the 17th century diggers from the English Civil War and call them socialists. Like, they didn't self-identify as socialist because socialist wasn't a word back then. But, like, come on, they were socialists. They were probably even communists. Juniper Berry says, words can mean more than one thing. It's fine. Thank you. Astro says, nobody should be allowed to use the word anarchist anymore. Yeah, I can get behind that. Okay, another aspect of this is that I don't want all societies to be the same. I want different societies to work different ways. Like a world where every culture, where every place on Earth has the same political system, like that feels boring to me. That feels dystopian. I think the world that I want to help try to create is a world where there are, like, I don't want to abolish all states everywhere, but I also don't want states to control all the territory on Earth. Like, I think it would be neat to have, like, some state-run territories and other non-state-run territories on the planet. I want, like, a plurality of political organization among humanity. And I would also like freedom of travel so that if you don't like where you are, you can just go somewhere else. Except, I don't know, I kind of think there should be global organizations with like worldwide authority to do certain stuff. Like I want there to be a level of international cooperation that I think might actually count as a global government. Like I think there should probably be some organization somewhere that's like keeping an eye on global atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and like trying to make sure that they're stable and not changing too much. And I kind of want that organization to have the authority to like blow up things and like shoot people who they disagree with. I also think there should be a global organization. Frankly, I might like vaccine mandates. I don't know what the issue is with vaccine mandates. I feel like we should probably have a global mandate. We should probably have a global government, and it should probably make everyone get vaccines, like at gunpoint. I don't think that's very anarchist of me. But I think the reason I'm not anarchist is not the reason most people who think I'm not an anarchist think I'm not an anarchist. Like anyone who said, like there was someone in the comments who said, real anarchists oppose capitalism, and it sounds like you're in favor of capitalism. And it's like, okay, it depends on what you mean by capitalism. Lots of people use the word capitalism to just mean free markets, and I think markets are neat. Like I don't know if we need to have markets infiltrating as many aspects of our lives as they currently do, but I don't want to abolish markets entirely. I think they're good for some things. But capitalist doesn't, like, originally capitalism didn't even mean that. Like, okay, capitalist comes from the same root as capital, as in, like, the capital of a country. Like, it means head. It comes from the Latin word for, like, capita. It's, like, head. Like, the head on top of your shoulders. And Juniper Berry says, I honestly think you're a few good books away from just calling yourself an anarchist, to be quite honest. Wait, what does that mean? TBCH? I started to read that as to be quite honest, and then I was like, wait a fucking second. Anyway, I've read The Conquest of Bread, and I've read, like, half of everything David Graeber ever wrote. Here's the thing, though. Like, a single book isn't going to convince me to call myself an anarchist. Like, the thing that would probably convince me to call myself an anarchist is if there were, like, a particular group of people who called themselves anarchist and who other people called anarchist that I found myself, like, in an alliance with. Like, if anarchist correctly described my, like, in practice, real world political orientation, then, like, oh, completely. TBCH means to be completely honest. Okay. Oh, and Juniper Berry said, I'm a few good books away from just calling myself an anarchist. I mean, maybe. It's possible. There is a long and noble tradition of anarchist theory that I am not especially plugged into. I can't imagine a world where, like, I try to read a whole bunch of okay, hang on. I wanna let me skim chat just a little bit, and because there's a bunch of messages here I haven't even skimmed, and I wanna, like, Lipamanka makes a really good point here. Prescriptivism and descriptivism aren't really beliefs. Prescriptivism is an action that affects others, and descriptivism is a tool of analysis. They're not necessarily comparable. That is a fantastic point. Thank you, Lipamanka. Juniper Berry says, I believe Andrewism on YouTube, an anarchist I don't always agree with, to be clear, said, my ideal world is a world in which many other worlds exist. Like, part of the fucking problem here, guys, is that, like, mainstream society does not... Like, mainstream society thinks that anarchists just want chaos and violence and disorder. But actual self-described anarchists are always so annoyingly fucking poetic. Like, they always come up with definitions of anarchism that no one in their right mind could possibly disagree with, and yet that also somehow, like, ties in with the history of anarchist theory in a way that makes sense. And it, like, these assholes will fucking trick you into starting to call yourself an anarchist if you listen to them for long enough, and then you go back out into the real world where anarchism means something completely different, and all of a sudden everyone thinks that you're, like, gearing up to throw bombs at the next police officer you see. Also, Andrewism is a good YouTube channel. Curious why he stopped calling themselves. I'm curious why that. God, I'm so fucking paranoid about pronouns all of a sudden. Lipamanka says, I think... I'm not gonna read that. Lipamanka says, I think everyone should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies, and that includes vaccines, but we should dismantle disinformation that discourages vaccines. Nah, I think we should just make people get vaccines. Like, a long time ago, I watched philosophy tubes. Like, I don't believe in bodily autonomy. Like, not even a little bit. A long time ago, I watched philosophy tubes video about abortion, and like, I've always strongly believed in abortion rights. I think like abortion should be safe and legal. Like, but I feel like a lot of the arguments for it are like philosophically wrongheaded. I came out of Philosophy Tube's video about like the one about the violinist about like abortion. I came out of that video like I went in being pro-choice. I came out of it being pro-choice and also thinking we should have an organ donation draft. Like yes, literally we should actually make people like we should actually just select people by lottery and harvest their organs for sick people. I don't believe in bodily autonomy. Like I am yeah, let's see. Now that's not necessarily to say that I think that I like trust the state as it currently exists to do something like that. Like I reserve the right to quibble with real life implementation, but at least in principle. Okay, Geometry says, only tangentially related, but I recently remembered that there were sort of Muslim anarchists in the 9th century, and as a Muslim, I find that mildly cool. Man, Islam intersects with political philosophy in such fucking interesting and complicated ways. It's... I have no idea what Geometry is talking about here, but that's actually totally plausible to me. Like, if... there is a version of Islam where you think that, like, the law has been solved. Like, we don't need governments anymore because, like, God gave all of the laws we're ever going to need to Muhammad and, like, proceeded to guide the Ummah in the next few centuries to develop Sharia law. Like, in Sharia law is a scary word, but if you think of Sharia law as just, like Catholics have a version of that. Like, church law is a thing in, like, Christian societies, too. Like, anyway, like, if there is a way to sort of take that to the extreme where like the only law that matters is Sharia law, which means nothing can functionally be added to it or taken away from it. Like, all right, I feel like I'm doing a bad job of explaining this, and there's like a scary countdown timer until I accidentally say something Islamophobic, so I'm just gonna move on. Eric Delidit.com says, have you read any Austrian economics? I read The Road to Serfdom a while back. What a weird fucking book. I had a lot of the same feelings reading The Road to Serfdom as I did reading the Second Treatise on Government by John Locke. Like, these guys construct these actually really, really impressive political theories. These cool arguments for, like, libertarianism, basically, for what I might just call liberalism in a broad sense, for the idea that, like, people should mostly be left alone as individuals to pursue their own individual happiness. And it's like, yeah, I agree. And then they're like, also kill all poor people. And it's like, hang on a fucking second. Like, they did it in slightly different ways. John Locke, in the Second Treatise on Government, seems to just sort of presume the existence of an infinite amount of land that anyone can go out to. Like, he's mostly concerning himself with this hypothetical state of nature that he seems to associate both with the very early days of the existence of the human species, when there were so few people that the planet was mostly empty, and also with, like, contemporary North America, since he didn't really consider indigenous Americans to be real people. So, like, or at the very least, I don't know, but he didn't think their occupation of the land was legitimate. So he was just sort of like his political ideas only make sense if there's an infinite amount of fertile land for anyone to go out to and start a homestead on their own, if they don't like the society they're in. The Road to Serfdom, meanwhile, seemed to just sort of assume that there already existed a welfare state so strong that, like, if that really did exist, it would, in my opinion, count as, like, outright socialism and would be really, really cool. Like, he seemed to like there was this insane line in that book where he was like, he was accusing socialists of trying to do way more than just make sure everyone has their basic needs met. He was accusing socialists of not just wanting everyone's basic needs to be met, but of wanting everyone to like wanting the government to guarantee a particular reasonably high standard of living for everyone. And he said, and he had this insane line where he was like, "We already have a welfare state that guarantees everyone the basic necessities like food and housing and stuff. Like that's not even up for debate. So clearly, that's not what socialists mean when they're talking about like what they're talking about." And I'm like, "What in the what socialist utopia are you fucking from? Like, bro." Apparently there is someone named Closet Witch says, hi, new to chat here, but I saw the last stream. Have you tried applying the David quote that you opened with to your thoughts on personal gender in the middle of it? Gender Nihilism, an Anti-Manifesto by Alison Escalante is a good read on that. That is a really funny title, and it makes me want to read whatever that is. Anyway, I haven't had any thoughts about gender recently that are any different from what I've said already. If anyone is curious, I am a cisgender man. My pronouns are he, him, please. Mark says endonym does endonym and exonym apply to ideologies? I don't know, but they should, and I think I might start applying them to ideologies. Like, because anarchist as an exonym and anarchist as an endonym have completely different definitions, and it's very confusing. Lipamanka says, I'm watching you, Zidnaf. If you get a pronoun wrong, I will cancel you. I have, like, this feeling in my bones that there's, like, multiple people out there compiling, like, a spreadsheet of everything shitty I've ever done. And, like, all I need to do is make some, like, particularly stupid mistake. And, like, all of a sudden, like, all of these spreadsheets are gonna be circulating online all of a sudden. I don't know. I feel like if you have more than like 100 subscribers on any social media website and you're not living in at least a little bit of constant fear of being canceled, I think you might not feel an appropriate level of fear. Oh, interesting. Okay, so oh man, I am jumping around chat unintentionally. There's no way, guys. If I miss your chat, I'm sorry. It's difficult for me to keep track of all of these. Tao Ailu says, I don't believe in bodily autonomy, you say, totally undeterred, but you think a wrong pronoun is what will sink you? Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I believe in bodily autonomy. Whatever. Bodily autonomy is... No one believes in absolute bodily autonomy. Like, no one believes that there aren't any except... Like, people who invoke bodily autonomy invoke it as, like, a general principle to adhere to. Like, no one thinks that bodily autonomy is, like, an absolute right that must always be respected under all circumstances, always. I take it back. There probably are people who think that way, but it leads rather straightforwardly to a sort of radical pacifism Like, you don't just have to be an anarchist at that point. You have to be, like a radical pacifistic anarchist. And I don't think that describes most people who invoke the idea of bodily autonomy. Like, I'm not pro-choice because I believe in bodily autonomy. I'm pro-choice because I don't think embryos are people yet, and also being forced to give birth against your will sounds like it must really, really, really fucking suck. Like, I don't need to invoke any abstract idea of bodily autonomy to say, like, I'm anti-forced birth. Yeah. Hillspit Zane says, no enforcement on vaccines, reinstall natural selection. So, if that is a joke, my response to that is, haha, very funny. Like, sincerely. But if anyone thinks that sincerely, I hope you die first. Natural selection is bad, actually, and we should be trying to stop it. I think the good timeline is the timeline where it is the destiny of humanity to put an end to natural selection once and for all. Closet Witch says the vax issue is not an issue when you view things as a social contract. You don't get to have autonomy to the extent it hurts others. Not entirely sure I follow along with the argument that's being made there. Lipamanka says, Islam is so fucking cool. I feel like you guys should know that I'm basically a Reddit atheist. That, like, I am an atheist, and not only am I an atheist, but I kind of think everyone else should be an atheist too. Like, I want to try to be polite about it. Like, I don't have high hopes of abolishing religion in my lifetime, but, like, you know, there's lots of Christians out there who, I don't know. It depends on what counts as religion exactly. That this is a whole bucket of worms. But frankly, I have they're neat, cool, interesting things about them. But I have a somewhat low opinion of both Islam and Christianity. Like, I grew up in an atheist household. Like my parents were atheists, before they met each other, and they raised me and my sibling as atheists. And, like, I grew up in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. Like, Christianity and Islam, like, Christianity gave us W and Islam gave us Al Qaeda, is kind of the mindset that's rather deep in my bones that I think I'm going to live with for the rest of my life, whether I like it or not. Tao Ailu says law. Yeah, so isn't Sharia just the Arabic word for law? So Sharia law is law. It's almost as good as the Los Angeles Angels. Okay, geometry. And then geometry says some really neat stuff. Let's see. Or at least I think it's neat. Okay, so, like, there was this reason-based school of Muslim theology known as the Mutazilites. It's a bit more detailed than that, but that's all that matters for this explanation. I've heard of the Mutazilites. I've read just enough about early Muslim history to know about the Mutazilites. Is that a Ain that the apostrophe represents? Mutazilites? No. Fuck, that's difficult. Mutazilites. Ites probably is an English suffix, isn't it? Alright, that's enough of that. A lot of the Mutazilites thought that even though Islam supported the idea of a Muslim state leader, or caliph, they thought that the caliphate was becoming more like a despotic kingdom. So a faction of the Mutazilites thought that this state will always be unjust in our modern time, so why have a state at all? I say they're sort of anarchists because they don't believe the state itself was unjust, just that it isn't possible to have a just one anymore. That's rad. Okay, let's see. Astro says, I took a Christian theology class, and they made a big point that God's law with the kingdom of heaven is meant to stay separate from the laws of states, even though that obviously didn't happen always. It feels to me like one of the biggest differences between, like, the big difference between Christianity and Islam that's reverberated and affected the subsequent development of both of them is the fact that, like, Muhammad was able to start his own state and Jesus wasn't. Like, we'll never know what Jesus would have done if he had, like if during Jesus's lifetime so many people had just sided with him that, like, he had been like declared the king of an independent Israeli or Israelite kingdom or whatever. Like, we'll never know what exactly he would have done with that power. Whereas we do actually kind of know exactly what Muhammad did with that power. And I feel like that's I don't know, it makes me wonder if Islam is is just intrinsically more difficult to disentangle from politics. I mean, it's dangerous to say that anything is intrinsically true of either Christianity or Islam, considering how huge and diverse both traditions have become over the centuries. I don't know, thinking out loud. There were actually, geometry goes on to say there were actually two Muslim anarchist groups in the 9th century, and the other one is so weird because its ancestry makes no sense at all. Honestly, I feel like if your whole conception of the legitimacy of the state is bound up in the particular state that Muhammad founded while he was still alive, then, like, I don't know, it's actually really, really easy for me to see how anarchism emerges rather directly from that. Closet Witch says, you have a video where you say all of the slurs. There is nothing they could put on the spreadsheet that would add anything more than that. I wish that were true, bro. Astro says, Lipamanka, you might be the guy he's talking about then. I was not talking about just one guy. I think there's like a dozen of them out there. And frankly, I don't think Lipamanka is one of them. I don't think any of these people would show up in my chat on my live streams this consistently. Lapadia says, like the linguistics, miss ya. I might, I if it weren't for the fact that I wanted to talk about anarchism a whole bunch, I would have titled this stream, like, talking about linguistics or something, because the stream before last one, someone in the chat said something along the lines of, what have you learned about linguistics since you stopped doing, have you learned much about linguistics since you stopped doing linguistics videos? And I have learned several very interesting things about linguistics that I haven't really talked about on YouTube in the last few years, but the answer to that is rather long, and I would have made that, like, the centerpiece of this stream, but I just made a video where I talked about anarchism a whole bunch, and I wanted to, like, I don't know, re-establish a little bit of radical leftist cred, I guess, by, like, name-dropping the books I've read and, like, engaging more seriously with anarchist theory. Because, like, I didn't really engage with anarchism in that video. I used anarchism as a prop to try to get liberals to stop being so cringe. Let's see. Juniper Berry, I presume talking about being forced to give birth, says, why would it suck? Removed from the fact that it's something being forced upon your body without your consent. I'm not even sure how to reply to this. Imagine having a little tiny person in your body who, like, explodes out of your, violently and bloodily explodes out of your body through your dick hole. Even people who decided to go through that on purpose don't usually have an especially fun time. Like, at least with, like, with my proposal of, like, we should have an organ donation draft, like, at least they can, like, put you under full anesthetic. Like, pregnancy is inherently incredibly fucking creepy when you actually think about it, when you actually engage with, like, the biology of it. Like it's basically this, like, an embryo is kind of like this little parasite that, like, and, like, every day that goes on that it's still alive, it becomes, like, closer and closer to, like, I've always been pro-choice, but I remember there was this one night when I was just sort of, like, everyone else was asleep and I was just sort of sitting alone, and I tried to, like, really viscerally picture, like, what it would feel like to be pregnant and to not be able to do anything about it. Like, to have this thing growing in my abdomen and getting a little bit bigger and bigger every day that I knew one day was gonna pop out of me. It's fucking horrifying. I don't believe in bodily autonomy, but I don't believe anyone should be forced to go through that. My mom has a genetic thing. It's this inheritable genetic thing. And I didn't inherit it, but I'm not... This is somewhat personal information, and I don't want to go into too many details without, like, talking to my family about it. But my mom has a genetic thing that makes miscarriages much more likely. My birth was rather difficult. And for my mom, when she was actively trying to get pregnant with me, safe and accessible abortion was kind of like really crucial healthcare. Like if that hadn't been available, it's entirely plausible that my parents like wouldn't have fucking bothered having children because it was so difficult. Like I literally might owe my existence to safe and accessible abortion. So yeah, I don't believe in bodily autonomy, but I do, but yeah, let's see. Let me I'm behind on chat by like a lot, and I've been very behind on chat this whole damn time. Ah, man, there's so many words. Ah, man, all of my shit about religion caused you guys to have so many thoughts. I can't read all of this. Okay, I give up. I'm gonna go to the bottom of chat. If I haven't read your chat, then it's getting lost to time. Wait, where am I? Why am I here? Mala Yenoth says, I think Juniper is asking you to dive deeper into your reasons for being pro-choice, not arguing that giving birth doesn't suck. Okay, I think I've done that. But if you need... I have lots of reasons for being... I've had this idea in my head for a video I might make that's like 20 things I didn't always know about abortion. Because like I've been pro-choice my whole life, but I feel like I've gotten more pro-choice the older I've gotten. Like, the more I learn about this shit, the more militantly pro-choice I get. If you want another reason to be pro-choice, here's one. I read this, like, medical paper a while ago that was like, okay, can fetuses and embryos actually feel pain at all? Like, do they have... Like, because if they do, if fetuses and embryos do feel pain, maybe we should be looking into figuring out how to anesthetize them before we perform abortions. And the paper came to the conclusion that, like, I think it left it... I think it didn't come to any conclusions about the third trimester, but it did come to the conclusion that at least in the first 2 trimesters, it literally does not have the capacity to feel pain. Like, it tried to come in... It seems like these researchers went into it with, like, trying to have, like, an open mind about what the answer might be. Like, they seemed to me prepared to come... Lipa Monk, I will talk more about religion in a sec, I promise. Yeah, they came to the conclusion that, at least for the first 2 trimesters... Yeah, all of the neural circuitry that eventually gets used for experiencing pain, that stuff, like, physically forms pretty early on. But the fetus slash embryo is in a state of... is in a state of unconsciousness. Like, it's more similar to being asleep than anything else. Like, people will point to, like, the kicking that you can start to feel happen early on. Like, in early days, people called it the quickening, when they could feel it squirming around in there. And they pointed out that, like, fetuses do that. Like, fetuses start kicking and squirming like that, even when they're literally missing the part of their brain. Even when they're literally missing most of their brain. Even when they're missing the... Like, it seems just really, really purely reflexive. So yeah, I don't believe in bodily autonomy as a general principle, but embryos and fetuses aren't people. Abortions don't hurt them because they can't be hurt, because they don't really exist as individuals yet. They have no capacity to feel pain, they have no capacity to want anything in the world. I don't think they count as moral patients in any way. And also, even if they did, like... like we do not live in a sci-fi utopia yet where you can create a person at no physical risk to yourself. Like getting pregnant and giving birth is medically risky, and like you don't want to force anyone to go through that. All right. Lipamanka said, Zidnaf, is religion bad or are some religious people bad? Religion is bad. By some definition of religion. Like it really, really depends on what you think counts as religion. But my mental archetype for religion is Christianity and Islam. Like I measure like when I think, is communism a religion, is Confucianism a religion, when I look at gray areas about like, does this count as a religion or not, what I'm basically doing is I'm comparing it to Christianity and Islam. And I think Christianity and Islam kind of suck. I don't like them. I think they're bad things. So that's why I think religion, like, given that my mental archetypes for religion are things that I kind of dislike. That's not, to be clear though, there are people, in fact there's like a lot of people, like a lot of people who manage by some bizarre miracle to twist Christianity and Islam into good things, to like justify doing good in the world using their religion. I don't have like much of a problem with that, but I do kind of a little bit feel like they're managing to be good people despite their religion rather than because of it. Most of the time, I think there are particular religious traditions that sometimes encourage people to do the right thing. The Quakers were neat. Like, Christianity as a whole might suck, but the Quakers, especially historically, in like 19th century, 18th century, they were pretty cool. Lipamanka says, why would that be twisting, Zidnaf? Okay, let me be real blunt. Jesus and Muhammad were both cult leaders. Like, there's a particular type of person who's like this intense narcissist who actually seems to think and act like they're the most important person in the world. And they're almost always men, and they accumulate these little followings around them of sycophants who do literally whatever they say. Like, this is a recurring social pattern throughout human history. Frankly, I think it might go back to like Australopithecus days. Like, sometimes narcissistic men start cults, these little groups that surround them and have just completely unquestioning loyalty to them. And like, I think Jesus and Muhammad were both probably real people, and I think both of them were that. Like, I don't think there's a huge difference between the historical Jesus or the historical Muhammad and, like, I'm drawing a blank on names. David Koresh and, like, you guys know what a cult is. You guys know what I'm talking about when I talk about cults. Like, there's lots of gray area about what counts as a cult and what doesn't. But, like, we use this word because this is a particular thing that keeps happening. L. Ron Hubbard? Maybe. I feel like I don't actually know enough about Scientology to make a judgment there. But yeah, I think, most religions start as, like, most mainstream religions today kind of start like that. They start as these super weird, fucked up cults. Malie Yeno says cult is a buzzword. Yeah, I know, but that's why I'm trying to explain. Like, I'm trying to elaborate on it a little bit. I'm talking about this particular form of social organization. This like, we're all going, like, there's this one particular charismatic leader and we're all gonna do literally whatever he says, and we're gonna stop thinking for ourselves. I think that's inherently bad, and I think you can't really have Christianity or Islam. Like, you can't have Christianity without Jesus, and you can't have Islam without Muhammad, and I think both Jesus and Muhammad were shitty fucking people. Yeah, that's why I don't like religion. Meme Now Deal With It says, the difference between a cult and a religion is that a religion is old enough for an important person to have mainstreamed it. That's a definition of... I've seen sentiments along those lines, and I think I can get on board with it. If there are any religious people in my audience... Oh, Lipamanka says, I am still waiting to hear your opinion on Judaism. If Moses was a historical person, then he was also a cult leader. If Moses existed, he probably didn't, but if he did exist, he very much falls into this cult leader archetype I'm constructing. Otherwise, which king was it? King Josiah? The one who's supposedly found the Deuteronomistic... the secret text? Or whatever. Like, there's this one king of ancient Judah who basically who basically did an inquisition to try to, like, stamp out all forms of Yahweh worship other than the one he approved of. And from what I can tell, most modern forms of Judaism are at least somewhat descended from that. Anyway, Judaism isn't as bad as... Is it? I don't know. Like... How anti-Semitic do I want to get here? Okay, Lipamanka, if you really want me to say something... Okay, Lipamanka says, I asked about Judaism as it's practiced today, not the prophet Moshe. Alright, how about this then? Circumcision? Fucking creepy. Don't like that. I don't want that to happen to babies. Fucking weirds me the fuck out. Don't like that. Probably circumcising babies should be illegal. So if you want me to say something shitty about Judaism as it's practiced today, there you go. I warned you guys... I feel like I'm probably, like, really, really pissing off religious people in my audience right now. I warned you guys I'm a Reddit atheist. Like, a lot of the time, I genuinely feel more... Lipamanka says, I agree with your take on circumcision, as do many Jews. Look, Lipamanka, you give me a definition of Judaism, give me a rule for, like, this is what counts as Judaism and this is what doesn't count as Judaism, and I will tell you why I think Judaism sucks. If you can't do that, if Judaism to you is just, like, a vibe, then I can't really disagree with that, I guess. Like, whatever vibes you like, fine. But, like, the things I associate with mainstream religions are pretty universally bad. And, like, I feel like whenever people... Sometimes I feel... See, there's also the fact that, in my mind, religion sort of implies belief in the supernatural. And it... Maybe not even the supernatural. It implies belief in something. Like, there are... And Lipamanka is going to come back with Judaism focuses way more on practice and, like, what you do in your life rather than on what you actually believe. And I've heard Muslims say the same thing. It may very well just be Christianity in particular that has an obsession with belief, but, like... I don't know, it feels to me a little bit like like an unfair twisting of the definition of the word religion. Like, it feels a little bit like... I feel like there's probably a lot of... well... Okay, if religion to you means performing a set of rituals that make you feel connected to your community and to a long tradition that you think is kind of neat, that I have no problem with. So like there's legitimate uses of the word religion where I don't actually have a problem with religion. There's ways of defining religion where I'm like, yeah, fine, I don't actually have a problem with that. But like there are patterns that humans seem to keep falling into. Like there's particular sorts of false beliefs that we seem to keep like accidentally falling into, like the cult thing. The like you look at the history of a bunch of different cults, of like the most prototypical cults rather than the edge cases, and they're all like weirdly eerily similar to each other. Like I think there's something in our DNA that makes us susceptible to certain things, to certain social structures, and to certain like it seems to me that all people everywhere are like it's more or less universal for human cultures for us to have a fair amount of anxiety about what happens to us when we die. And I think almost all religions have some sort of narrative about, like, if you don't have a narrative about what happens after you die, it's kind of hard for me to call you a religion. Like you're like there are edge cases, like Confucianism is arguably a religion, and it doesn't like and Confucianism doesn't really say anything in particular about the afterlife, I think, as far as I know. I think that one's complicated. Confucianism might be tied up in certain versions of Chinese ancestor worship. Or ancestor... What's the word for that? Ancestor respect? Ancestor veneration? Whatever. Point is, I think, like, there's this thing that keeps happening in human history where people have a lot of anxiety about like what happens after we die, and then there are these charismatic leaders who come along promising answers, promising this is what happens after you die, this happens if you do X, this other thing happens if you do Y, and it's this tool to control people. And yeah, like that, I feel like we should have a word for that tendency, and I think religion is as good a word for that tendency as any other word. And I think that tendency is bad, and we should stop doing it. All right, let me see what people are saying other than Lipamanka. Felipe Vasconcelos says there's a very big difference between spiritual practices and cultural customs. And maybe. I've never heard a satisfactory definition for what counts as spiritual and what doesn't. I've also never heard a satisfactory explanation for what counts as, like, materialism. Like, I've been, when I get into arguments, especially when I get into arguments with religious folks, they often accuse me of materialism, of believing, of the position that only material things exist and there are no non-material things. And I'm like, I don't know, I believe in radio waves, though. Radio waves feel pretty goddamn non-material to me. And arguably, my consciousness has more in common with radio waves than it does with, like, rocks and trees. Like, it's a series of, like, electrical signals being sent back and forth over what are basically biological wires. Like, but I don't know. There's probably a definition for those things where I am a materialist. Like, I probably am a materialist, whether I want to self-identify as one or not. Whatever. Let's see. Tao Ailu says, a huge complication in this whole discussion is the question who defines what is Islam or Christianity or otherwise. See the discussion on anarchism from before Zidnaf, you're viewing it from the outside. Yeah, and part of the whole discussion before was it's not obvious to me that viewing it from the outside or viewing it from the inside, that either of those is necessarily better than the other. So, and I am in fact viewing religion from the outside, and yeah, I don't like any of it. Okay. Let me actually put a little caveat on that. I saw someone a while ago assert, there was some discourse on Tumblr that I watched happen about, like, cultural Christianity. It's this notion that, like, if it's possible to be culturally Christian and to, without self-identifying as Christian anymore. Like, maybe you don't go to church anymore, maybe you don't believe in God anymore, but there's aspects of Christianity that seep into your culture and into your worldview that, like, stick with you even after you leave Christianity. And there's also, like, practices that stick with you. Like, the most obvious version of this is the fact that a lot of atheists practice Christmas. Like, I grew up, like I said, in an entirely atheist household, but we still celebrated Christmas every year. I think there's... Okay, for one thing, I think there's a good point to be made about this. It does sort of make me wonder, like, how far away do we have to get from Christianity before we're not even culturally Christian anymore? Like, my reaction to that is basically, you probably have a point, and that's fucking embarrassing for me. How do I stop being culturally Christian? I've actually been learning a lot more about Hinduism recently. Partly this is because I follow, I don't know if I'm a fan of his. He's a controversial figure. I don't know how to feel about all of the relevant controversies, but Dr. K, the healthy gamer GG guy, he is some version of, I think, secular Hindu or something, and his Hinduism affects a lot of his advice and stuff. And I think it's kind of neat, and part of me, it made me wonder, like, can I culturally convert to Hinduism? Like, can I become a cultural Hindu without, can I become a cultural Hindu without actually believing in the literal existence of any of the devas? Like, what if I just like them as a metaphor? Parvati is cool. There's some really fucking cool stories about Parvati. The story about her... The story about Parvati wooing Shiva is fucking awesome. And I don't know. I'm hoping if I learn enough about Hinduism and, like, find some real life Hindu people and get them to tell me how to be a proper Hindu and start doing all of the right rituals, maybe I can cleanse myself of the lingering cultural Christianity that's still stuck to me. On the other hand, maybe spite isn't a good reason to join a religion. I hope me going over that, if anyone in my audience is religious and is hearing me talk about religion and is like, but I'm not like that, and I'm not like that, and my particular religious tradition isn't anything like what you're saying, I just want to say to you, good for you, keep doing what you're doing, you're right, I'm not talking about, like, let me talk about my problems with religion in general, and, like, I am not talking about you in particular. And I hope my somewhat embarrassing cringe forays into cultural Hinduism, I don't know, I hope that placates you, I guess. Like, I'm trying to make the point that, like I am not against religious symbolism or religious ritual per se. All right, there's probably been I haven't been trying to keep up on chat. Time to try to catch up on chat just a little bit. Mega is Greasy Sweet asks, why are you terraforming this out while talking about religion? Because it's fun? Do you hate fun? Lipamanka says, actually, I think we should try to define religion rigorously. And then Astro says, let's see, Astro says, so is Judaism more about skepticism or about belief in God himself? Lipamanka says, for me, skepticism, for some other Jews, belief in God. Yeah, but that would imply that anyone who rigorously practices skepticism is Jewish, whether or not they even know what a Yom Kippur is. Or like I feel like there have to be some culturally specific aspects of the definition. Except no, like, the question wasn't what is Judaism. The question wasn't what is the technical definition of Judaism. The question was what is Judaism about for you. If you think the centerpiece of your religion is skepticism itself, fine, okay, that's kind of neat. I'm not talking about you when I talk about religion then. I'm talking about, like, fucking Catholicism and Southern Baptists. Like, they're the ones who keep making us think about them. Like, they're the ones who keep trying to, like, integrate religion with the state. Like, when I think about, like, trying to push back against religion, like, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Alright, Lipamanka seems to be saying that their version of Judaism endorses some version of pantheism? I think that's a version of pantheism. Lipamanka, I'm curious, if you're still here, I'm curious if you know anything about Spinoza. Like, how do you and your sect feel about Spinoza? Because that feels very Spinoza to me from the little I've heard about Spinoza. Malia Yeno says, I wouldn't even say you had to be a former Christian to practice Christian culture. We live in a world ruled by wasps, lol. I agree. I think that, like, okay, I learned a little bit of Arabic a while back, and Arabic and Islam are very intimately entwined with each other. Like, there's a whole lot of stock phrases in Arabic that you just sort of use in everyday life, regardless of your religious beliefs. I feel like there's probably a pretty strong case to be made that literally any native Arabic speaker is in some sense culturally Muslim. And if one were to accept that argument, I do think it kind of follows naturally that any native English speaker is necessarily a little bit culturally Christian. With the possible exception of Jews who have like a relatively long, like, there's a relatively long tradition of Anglophone Judaism. I don't know if there's any. I'm open to disagreement on that point, but just a thought I had. Lipamanka says, I would love for people to sit on a Talmudic conversation before judging Jewish spirituality and skepticality. Lipamanka, if there is, like, do people ever, like, post these Talmudic conversations online or something? Because that actually sounds kind of interesting. Ooh, Mark says, how about Buddhism? It's almost entirely cultural. Buddhism, I was actually thinking about Buddhism. For one thing, I don't know what exactly. So part of why Christianity and Islam feel sort of inherently like corrupt to their bones to me personally. That feels very insulting to Christians and Muslims, and I do apologize to anyone in this stream who might be making feel uncomfortable. But yeah, I think the historical Buddha, like Siddhartha Gautama, how do you pronounce his name? Is the TH a fricative or just an aspirated plosive? Is it Siddhartha or Siddhartha? Anyway, that guy, I feel like he might have been a little bit on the, he might have been kind of in a gray area on the cult leader pattern that I was talking about. Like, I think Jesus and Muhammad were very, very unambiguously cult leaders. The Buddha probably was a little bit. He also might just have been a meditation teacher. Like, there's little bits and pieces of the stories, like, depending on the religion, I think there's bits and pieces about the stories of its founding that are definitely made up, and there's other bits and pieces that almost definitely actually happened. Like, most of the stories about Muhammad probably are actually things that happened. I don't believe the whole angel thing. I don't believe. Isn't there some story about him having, like, ascended directly to heaven in Jerusalem at the end of his life or something? Like, there's parts of the stories I don't buy. But, like, most of it seems pretty plausible to me. Jesus, I think it's kind of 50-50. Like, there probably was an actual guy who lived back then who probably did actually get executed by the Romans. I especially believe the part where Jesus says, hey, if you want to follow me, you have to abandon your family and never talk to them again. Like, that very much feels like the kind of thing an actual cult leader would have said. So, like, that I do actually believe actually happened. I'm using the word actually way too much. The part of the story of the Buddha that feels most plausible to me is the notion that he sat under a tree for a really long time and had some sort of experience that made him think that he had, like, achieved enlightenment. He had discovered something really, really important about something that he needed to go tell everyone about. Like, I think the Siddhartha Gautama probably was a real person. He probably really was a meditation teacher. He probably did sit under a tree for a while and have some sort of experience. Beyond that, like, the Buddha is one of the more murky figures in this regard. Like, there's, I don't know how much we can really say with any confidence he did or didn't do. And yeah, I do think, like, I don't think Buddhism is entirely just cultural practices and stuff. Like, it does seem to me like there are certain theological aspects of Buddhism. There's certain ideas it has about, like, the nature of the self and reality that I don't know I can really get on board with. I certainly don't have the same kind of distaste for Buddhism that I do for Christianity or Islam. On the other hand, it does seem to me that Buddhists in the real world often sort of fall into the same traps and patterns and the same sorts of harmful patterns that come up in religion over and over and over again. Like, what, wasn't there a Buddhist monk in Burma or something who was, like, cheering on, who was, like, really famous and who was, like, cheering on the genocide of the Rohingya people? I feel like there might be a universal element for all religions that sort of encourages a lack of skepticism. Like, it might be kind of inherent to what I think of as even counting as a religion, that it discourages you to think for yourself, that encourages you to, like, just believe what the guru says and don't question it. And I think that's very deeply ingrained in my mind with the definition of the word religion, and I think it, I feel like I'm going in circles. You guys are probably tired of the religion talk by now. Is there anyone else? Let's see. Charlie says, why would you want to stop being culturally Christian? I can I think you can have a healthy relationship to it while also recognizing how it affects your patterns of thought. Because Christianity is fucking horrible and creepy and I hate it. Like, I... Because the notion that someone needed to die for my sins in order for me to deserve not to burn in hell forever is inherently fucked up. And also, I think, kind of an intrinsic part of Christianity. Like, I don't think you can really have Christianity without believing Jesus died for your sins. And that implies that someone needed to die for my sins. It implies that I deserve to go to hell. And the only thing that makes it so that I don't deserve to go to hell is that, like, my sins have been paid for in some way by Jesus' sacrifice. And that's why we hang up pictures on our walls of a man being slowly tortured to death by the state. I hate every single thing about this, and I want to distance myself from it as much as humanly possible. That's why I don't want to be culturally Christian. Mega is greasy sweet. Hot take. Asian religions are more based than Western religions. Okay, South Asian religions are neat. Like, things from out of the Indian subcontinent are neat. Confucianism is pretty fucked up. Confucianism sucks. Taoism, I don't know, it kind of depends. And technically, Christianity and Islam were both founded in Asia, although I'm stretching. I am at that point stretching the definition of Asia just a little bit. But, what do you call someone who's, like, we have the term Francophile for someone who's obsessed with French culture. I don't know if I've ever heard it, but if someone used the term Sinophile to refer to someone who's really into Chinese culture, I would know exactly what they meant. What do you call someone who's really into Indian culture? Like, not, like, South Asian culture, like, you know, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh culture. Because I might be just a little bit of a that. Juniper Berry says, I feel like this entire conversation wouldn't be happening if people had more experience with various different religions. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I've had at least a little bit of experience with a bunch of different religions, and they all feel kind of the same to me. Like, the Hare Krishna people creep me the fuck out in basically the same ways that extremist Christians do. Geometry made the same point I did, that aren't all Western religions technically from Asia? Lipamanka says religions themselves are absolutely fine, and many people, many organizations and states and people who claim to be motivated by religion are bad. Lipamanka, I am somewhat curious what you think does and doesn't count as a religion. Like, what makes something a religion, and what makes something not a religion? Tao Ailu says, here's a question. Can you be religious without faith? Are the cultural practices, even when devoid of faith, still religion? And no, Buddhism isn't without gods. Okay, the word religion means different things to different people, obviously. All words mean different things to different people. I was raised in an atheist household where religion was kind of a boogeyman. Like, like the way I grew up using the word religion, it's like you use religion as an insult. Like, you compare something to religion as a way to denigrate it. So, like, yeah, I don't know. If it sounds like I'm being too hard on religion, that might be part of the reason why. Juniper Berry says, your problems with religion aren't actually problems with all or even most religions. I don't think you're really anti-religion. Okay, what is religion? What makes something a religion or not? Like, is communism a religion? Is Marxism a religion? Is Confucianism a religion? Is, like, if someone can tell me what they think the word religion means, then I might have an easier time telling them what I think of that. Like, if you just ask me what do you think of religion? Like, is religion inherently bad? I'm gonna fall back on the way I use the word religion. You know, like if you don't say, hey, here's what I mean by the word religion, what do you think of that? Like, is that okay or is that not okay? If you do that, then maybe I'll be like, okay, by that definition, religion is fine. But if you don't specify that, if you just say, do you like religion or do you not like religion, I'm gonna fall back on my idea of religion as inherently anti-skeptical, and I'm gonna say, no, religion is inherently bad. Charlie says this chat is surprisingly busy considering we're on a secret channel. I have been the thought of this channel is bleeding subscribers. Like, every single time I do anything on this channel, whether I post a new video or I do a live stream, a few people always unsubscribe. Like, and frankly, I think that's for the best. This channel is supposed to be secret. Like, I feel like me doing these live streams is kind of the equivalent of, like, shooting a gun in the air to drive property prices near you down in order to keep gentrification away. Alright, let's see. Oh, I am even more behind on chat than I thought I was. Oh my god, there's been so much chat that I haven't read. There's so much chat I haven't read. It goes on forever. Holy fuck. Okay, I think I directly asked Lipamanka a couple questions here, so I'm gonna skim to see if Lipamanka answered the questions, and then I'm just gonna jump to the current time and skip all of your... By the way, okay, so you might note, it is not possible to send me a super chat right now. It is not possible to pay money to get your chat at the top of the live chat for me to see it. That is because that functionality is not enabled for me because not enough people watch my live streams. But if I rack up in the span of 365 days enough total watch hours on all of my live streams, then YouTube will enable super chats, and I might be able to make just a tiny bit of money from these, which would be a whole lot of fun for me. So I'm sort of... That's like a long-term goal of mine. I'm not entirely sure if it's realistic, but it would certainly be nice. I do apologize for everyone who is posting things that I don't have time to read. Lipamanka has complicated and nuanced points that I'm not going to engage with because I'm trying to get caught up on chat. Who the hell is Yom Kapoor? I misspoke, and I think you knew exactly what I meant. Y-O-M. Yom Kapoor. It's Kippur, right? With an I? Whatever. Lipamanka says things, and I'm gonna skip it. Lipamanka says Anglophone Judaism doesn't make sense to me because of all of our ceremony uses Hebrew. Yeah, but there must be, like, traditional ways of explaining Jewish stuff to native English speakers. Whatever. I give up. Whatever. Lipamanka says, also Zidnaf, if you want to sit in on Talmudic conversations, read the Talmud. It is recorded Talmudic conversations. Isn't the Talmud huge? What happens if I just flip to a random part of the Talmud and read a random bit? Would that work? That'd probably be fine, right? Alright, someone posted a pronunciation guide. I'm not... Okay. Siddhartha Gautama. Okay, but how do you say it in English? Like, English does not have aspirated voiced plosives. Like, I'm not fast enough at code switching to say, yeah, sure, I follow the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama. Like, no, code switching is annoying and I don't like doing it. Juniper Berry says, dude, seriously, what historic information about Jesus are you drawing on when you call him a cult leader? This is a whole rabbit hole. What exactly you can and can't say about the historical Jesus is a whole thing, and it's complicated, and if you come to different conclusions, fine. I don't want to have to get into all of the evidence. Like, there's what exactly can and can't reasonably be said about the historical Jesus is a question that I am interested in, that I have heard a lot of people talk about, and I have developed my own personal opinions about it over the course of many years of watching college professors on YouTube give lectures about it and reading the Gospels myself, or, English translations of them, and, like, I don't know. I do feel like there's a decent amount we can reconstruct about the guy. Look, I get cult leader vibes. You put together everything I think we can say about him. Like I said, I think the part in the Gospels that talk about him saying that you have to like abandon your family, that like I am like, don't talk to your family ever again, follow me exclusively, is a very classic cult leader move, and I do actually believe that the historical Jesus probably did that. Felipe Vasconcelos says, I don't think Jesus was unambiguously a cult leader because we're not sure that he was a real guy. Jesus was a real guy. There was a guy from Nazareth who went around doing faith healings who got executed. Like, I think that much is we can say with a fair amount of confidence. He might even, I think he probably even, Passover? I think it was on Passover that he got executed. I think we can probably even confirm that. I completely understand that that's supposed to be IPA, but it's giving running a phrase through meme text generator IMO. Yeah, I see it. Bunch of people are saying you can criticize Islamic people, organizations, actions, movements, etc., not the core itself without being Islamophobic. The existence of religion is not what harms people. I feel like the existence of... whatever. I've been anti-Christian and anti-Muslim enough on this stream. I should probably try to move on. Geometry says Islam is a violent religion that supports terrorism is not an Islamophobic statement, but all Muslims are violent and support terrorism is an Islamophobic statement. I'm hell. I feel like Islam isn't. I feel like Islam is a violent religion that supports terrorism. I think that might actually be a little bit. Well, okay, I don't know if it's Islamophobic, but it's definitely incorrect. Like, we just went over the fact that there's a bunch of, like, anarchist Muslims, at least historically, like, that. Also, terrorism. The word terrorism is a tricky word that I try to avoid because I don't know what it means, and. Yeah. I don't think I would sign on to the statement Islam is a violent religion that supports terrorism. I think Islam, as practiced by a whole lot of people around the world, is a religion of peace and love that brings people together and makes the world a better place. I also think it's inherently stupid, and everyone should be an atheist like me, but I don't think those two thoughts are inherently contradictory. Lipamanka says, I don't think spiritual beliefs are ideas, at least not the kinds that can be criticized. Like, if I believe I have a soul, what is your criticism of that? I mean, depends on what your definition of soul is. This is kind of what I was getting at earlier with the fact that, like, the label of materialist has been applied to me, but I don't know if I actually agree with it because I'm fuzzy on what the distinction is even supposed to be exactly between material substance and spiritual substance. Fuck. That's happened to me so many times now. I'll be reading chat while mining, and then I'll fall into a pit like this. Because I don't have my eyes on the... I don't have my eyes on the road. Or on the Minecraft terraforming project, as the case may be. Lipamanka says, maybe I don't know what a soul is, but I still believe I have one. Is that hurting anyone? I don't know. It might be. Like, does your belief that you have a soul cause any sort of behavior? Like, I feel like most of the time beliefs tend to be the kinds of... well, no. I feel like this is a complicated philosophical discussion that one would need to have, like, a rather long back and forth about in order to really pin down anything useful. Okay, I am so fucking behind on chat. Juniper Berry says hanging a figure of someone executed by the state on your wall is based, actually. Okay, that is, like, the one thing I do actually think is kind of based about Christianity. That, I gotta hand it to them in that one respect. Multiple people... In response to the question I asked absolutely forever ago about what the Indian equivalent to Sinophile or Francophile would be, multiple people are posting Hindophile, one person posts Brahmophile, one person posts Indomania. Probably Hindophile is the correct word. Someone says that Wikipedia lists Indomania and Indophilia. That makes it sound like a sex thing. I mean, not that I wouldn't fuck Shiva, but that's not quite what I was trying to get at. Juniper Berry says, then you haven't had very much experience then. That's, like, universal if you think. If you think everything in a category is roughly the same, you probably don't have that much experience. Doesn't that depend on what you think is roughly the same? I've had lots and lots of different experiences with different particular bodies of water, and they all felt wet to me. I feel like generalizations are fine sometimes, actually. Can I, like... I wish it were easier to, like, open a new tab. I want to, like, right-click on someone's name to try to look at their YouTube channel. Wait, can I do this? Does that work? Yes, that does work. Someone named Malgly says, hi, Zidnaf. Nice to see you're still around. You were a great inspiration back when we made videos. Do you remember us from back in the day? I'm sorry I do not. I just looked at your YouTube channel, though. It looks like Langtuber stuff, but in German? I can't actually tell if this is German or some other language, but looks neat. I'm sorry I don't remember you. Man, there's so much chat I haven't read. I give up. I'm skipping to the present time. I'm skipping all the way forward in chat, and if anyone... And I'm just giving up. I want to go back to being caught up on chat, no matter how much I have to skip. So I'm gonna go most recent. Malglee says it's fine, we weren't really expecting that. Good to hear. Alright. After having jumped forward in the live chat, it appears to me that everyone is having rather, like, there are rather nuanced debates about religion happening here that I'm all the way out of, I'm all the way out of a loop on what the hell any of you are talking about. Ivy Jack says, the diversity of this little chat seems like a credit to Zidnaf's way of thinking and communicating. Y'all so pretty. That's so sweet. What a sweet little comment. Achamo says, yeah, chat for the longest time was basically Lipamanka and Malay and Juniper having discourse, like I said earlier. Let me skim through chat just a little bit, looking for anyone other than those guys who might have said anything interesting. Pop-Tart Second says, I've always thought the material/spiritual dichotomy comes from empiricism and the ability to reproduce phenomenon. See also natural/supernatural. Yeah, I don't know how much I like that definition, though. Like, that feels like a definition designed specifically to make it so that it's irrational to believe in anything spiritual, or at least to like exclude talk of spirituality from communal discourse. Because like if something isn't empirical or reproducible, then there's no way to make anyone other than you believe anything about it. But I think there's lots of people who think that their spiritual beliefs are in fact quite empirical, perhaps even reproducible. I don't know, it feels weird to exclude their idea of spirituality from the conversation. Achamo says, I think I might have made him scroll back up. Oops. Alright, I scrolled back down, don't worry. Juniper Berry says, I'm being silenced! I've been cancelled! I'm cancelling all of you. If I ever get cancelled, I'm going to cancel all of you right back. Weepamanka wants to know if they should eat cranberry sauce right now. No, I am not hungry, and therefore you should not eat anything. I know that's a silly answer, but it felt like a silly question, so... Juniper Berry says, you're calling for a fast? We're a religion now. Oh my god. Multiple people are posting Zidnafism now. So, David Graeber, I forget where he said this, but there was some paper he wrote or something where he roasted communists for naming their various sects after like particular prominent thought leaders. Like, think Marxists, Leninists, Trotskyists, Maoists. Like, all of these isms are named after particular people, whereas anarchist isms tend to be named after particular practices. Like, within, like, there's no such thing as Bakuninism or Proudhonism, but there is platformism, and there's what are some others? Syndicalism. Like, they tend to name themselves after the particular social structures that they're trying to create. And he was kind of dunking on communists in that way. Like, he clearly seemed to think that it's kind of embarrassing to name your ideology after a guy. You're sort of admitting that, like, this one guy is the only person who I think had any useful thoughts at any point. Like, and like the way Marxists sometimes use, I think this might have been more true historically, like in the early 20th century, but I have heard it said that Marxists sometimes use the work of Marx in basically the same way Christians use the Bible. Like, just point to a page number where Marx said something or another, and that's all the proof you'll ever need that it's true. If it weren't for David Graeber having said all of that, I would absolutely want to call myself a Graeberist. Like, my ideology might... Not even my ideology. I feel like there's a whole lot of stuff I would have disagreed with David Graeber about. Like, I think the fact that he called himself an anarchist and I don't call myself an anarchist is, like, there's a lot of reasons for that have more to do with, like, the kinds of people he and I hung out with rather than, actual ideological convictions, but I do think there might be a handful of ideological convictions that that he and I would have disagreed with. Meme Now Deal With It says anarcho-Marxism is a thing. Wait, I thought that was going to be a question. I thought you had typed is anarcho-Marxism a thing? I guess anarcho-Marxism would have to be a thing. Like, Marx did say that the state would wither away eventually, right? Is all Marxism necessarily anarcho-Marxism? Maybe non-anarcho-Marxism is necessarily reformism of some sort. Huh. Achamo said, I myself was making up the Esperanto term hidnafanujoj. Or, wait, there's a little hat on the H, so that's probably a velar fricative, right? Hidnafanujoj for Zidnafism. But given past streams, that's probably not the best idea. I don't know. I personally don't want to learn Esperanto or like be in an Esperantist community, but like I have no problem with other people doing it. Like it is neat. It is a neat little language. I hope people who use it are having fun with it. I feel like the biggest problem with coining a term for Zidnafism is I don't have the faintest idea what it would mean. Like what are the core tenets of Zidnafism? I don't think there are any, and I don't especially want to define them. Geometry says, but what would anarcho-Marxism be? Geometry is saying that anarcho-Marxism might be an internal contradiction, and they're saying, let's see, anarcho-communism believes that the state is always unjust. There doesn't need to be a transitionary period where it withers away. Like, that's the main thing that differs from anarcho-communism from forms of communism descended from Marxism. One believes the state has to go away immediately, and the other believes there needs to be a transitionary period of socialism before the state is abolished. It feels okay, but it feels wrong to me to say that someone isn't an anarchist just because they like shouldn't gradualist anarchism be a thing? Like, gradualist anarchism doesn't strike me as inherently contradictory. Like, we have gradualist socialists. There are socialists who think that capitalism should be abolished, but we should do it slowly and carefully. And, like, it's not like Marxists think that the state is, like, a good thing in itself. Like, this feels like a pragmatic disagreement. Like, I don't know. I kind of stand by my earlier assertion that, like, Geometry says, I mean, if you say that, then the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was gradual anarchist. I mean, I might actually defend that thesis. Meme Now Deal With It says, so far the only Zidnafist belief is that we shouldn't eat when Zidnaf isn't hungry. Let me actually try to find some. Meme Now Deal With It left... I remember Meme Now Deal With It leaving a really funny comment on my most recent video, and I cannot for the life of me remember what it was. I'm going to skim through the comments on that video until I find it. I don't think it'll take long. Yeah, there it is. An anarchist is some... So you started with an anarchist is someone who is against archy. And then, like, an anarchist is someone who's against archons. But then you say, imagine you're in the world I described where there's a legal loophole that lets you commit murder. And then you went on to say, imagine the premise to... Wait, hang on. Alright, someone else made the exact same point I was going to make, which is, in Death Note, the loophole is not legal, it's nor socially acceptable, blah, 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 then... all your... Wait, no, hang on. This is all your meme... Meme now deal with it, and all your meme are belong to us are two different people. Fuck. Okay, but all your meme are belong to us is also in chat. Anyway, I just wanted to clown on all your meme are belong to us for a little bit by saying, yes, the Death Note, famously that show where no one does anything illegal and the police sit by not doing anything because no laws are being broken. Also, I never said that no one should ever eat food when I'm not hungry. I said Lipamanka specifically should not eat right now. And my reasoning for that is that I am not currently hungry. Like, I just sort of asked myself, am I feeling food right now? Like, I tried to listen to the spirits. I tried to listen to God and all of the devas, and I asked myself, food? And they told me no. And I'm pretty sure the reason they told me that is because I wasn't hungry, but like, I don't know how else I was supposed to come to a conclusion about whether or not Lipamanka should or shouldn't eat cranberry sauce right now. Juniperberry says if they're anarchists, they're historically very bad at achieving it, and they tend to drop the premise relatively quickly once they gain power. I agree. David Graeber pointed out that, like, anarchists might have a lot of trouble, like anarchists might not have had a lot of success with, like, nation building. Like, it's rather difficult to clear out a particular territory and to, like, build some sort of anti-state institutions there that keep states from forming in that area. Like, it's... Basically, it is difficult. Anarchists historically have not had a ton of success establishing political control, whereas Marxist-Leninists seem to have Marxist-Leninists seem to have had like, basically the only thing they were ever good at is establishing political control. Geometry says, well, there was revolutionary Catalonia for a few years. That is true. There is the canonical handful of examples of real-life anarchism being implemented. There's revolutionary Catalonia, Rojava, and Chiapas. And I feel like those are the big three. If anyone thinks I'm missing something that deserves to be counted among revolutionary Catalonia, Chiapas, and Rojava as, like, places where anarcho-communist philosophy has been practically implemented and where it went relatively well, I would be curious to hear thoughts on that. Geometry says Rojava is less anarchist. It has its own ideology, democratic confederalism. Yeah, but I don't know. I should really learn. One thing I really want to learn more about is I want to learn more about how Chiapas and Rojava and revolutionary Catalonia. I want to learn more about how that, like, worked out in practice. Like, how, like, what those places were like on the ground. Because I feel like my understanding of all of that stuff is extremely fuzzy. Meme Now Deal With It says that Zidnaf is a splitter from Zidnafism, as he doesn't believe in the core Zidnafist beliefs. I think Meme Now Deal With It is like declaring themselves... Lipamanka says Zidnaf is our prophet, but Meme Now Deal With It seems to be declaring themselves to be the high priest of Zidnafism, and has in fact excommunicated me already. This religion is only a few minutes old, and we already have splinter factions. Juniper Berry says, I think it's a bit unfair to judge anarchism by the standards of state building, since that's what we're in explicit opposition to. I was trying to imply as much, but yes, you are correct. Mulgley says people also list Makhnovist Ukraine, though I don't think much anarchist philosophy was implemented. Yeah, that I feel like there's been more times when there were more brief flashes in the pan about that kind of thing. All your meme are belong to us says, do you have the chat in full screen? So I have Minecraft open in one window, and I have a browser, I have Firefox open in another window, and Firefox has chat open, and I am looking back and forth between these two windows. I briefly tried to figure out how to do that thing that streamers do where they put chat on screen while they're doing it, and I couldn't figure out how to do it and gave up rather quickly. Jim Cullen says, I rather like the idea one commenter had on the original video that anarchism isn't opposed to state building, but to hierarchy and the exercise of power. So I already a little bit addressed this earlier in the stream. I talked about how I don't think I'm necessarily opposed to hierarchy as long as it's like voluntary and like potentially renegotiable. I feel like there's more to say on this point though. Like, okay, what's one of the biggest things people say in order to make fun of anarchists? Like, what's the sort of anarchist trope? I would assert that it's anarchists want, yes, Astro, abolish bedtime. That's exactly where I was going with this. Because, and I think the reason that's where everyone starts to go is because, like, I think more and more people are exposed to this conception of anarchism where it's not opposition to the government, it's opposition to hierarchy in general. And thing is, I think that might actually come across to some people as more radical. Like, the traditional idea of an anarchist is just someone who wants to abolish the state. But if you're opposed to all hierarchy, you might be opposed to abolishing the family itself. Like, this is something David Graeber talked about a lot. That, like, hierarchy isn't usually actually imposed from the top down. Oddly enough, hierarchy tends to emerge from the bottom up. Like, fathers of children do not justify their authority over their children by comparing themselves to kings, but kings justify their authority over their subjects by comparing themselves to fathers all the time. And that's because hierarchy is actually most intuitive to us on a familial level, on a really, really small scale. And I think there's actually, like, really, really interesting, like, sociological, anthropological, psychological reasons for that I could spend forever talking about. But I feel like if you want to abolish all hierarchy, then, like, one of the fastest ways to kind of throw a wrench in that is to be like, okay, what about children though? Like, you can't abolish the hierarchy between parents and children. That doesn't work. That, like, we evolved to have those hierarchies. That wouldn't even make any sense. I don't know if I agree with that critique. If I were, hypothetically, were I to try to defend anarchism from such a critique, you know what I might point to? Is I might point to Bluey, the Australian cartoon. I think Bluey might actually be Bluey might actually be really effective anarchist propaganda. Like, it portrays perhaps the least hierarchical social it portrays like the least hierarchical family I've ever seen in media ever. Like, particularly because like it I don't know if I can defend this, but like the parents in Bluey do in fact tell the children what to do all the time. Like, orders are given and orders are followed. But like, I feel like Bluey it's very very close to like the platonic ideal of like the way Bluey works. It feels to me like the internal dynamics of that family is one of, from what I can tell, rather self-conscious opposition to the notion of hierarchy. Like, yes, the parents are in charge and they tell the children what to do all the time, but the children rebelling against that control is sort of built into the system almost. Like, it's like the parents are never surprised when that happens, and they in fact have rather elaborate plans for doing it. Like, the central thing to me is that the parents don't expect obedience from their children. Like, Bandit and Chili are never are never especially surprised when Bluey or Bingo go off and do something that they were told not to do. And like, I don't think we ever see like we don't see punishment often. Like my parents were relatively radical in that they raised me without ever spanking me. Like, both of my parents were spanked growing up. I was never spanked growing up. They did use timeout though. Timeout was a very big thing. The parents in Bluey don't just like the parents in Bluey don't just not spank their children. Like, I cannot fathom the idea of Bandit or Chili spanking Bluey or Bingo. I don't even think they use timeout, because like the whole it's like their whole family is built on this model of like, yes, the parents sometimes have to exert coercive control over the children, but like it Bluey feels to me like an example of like the absolute most egalitarian and libertarian that a family can possibly get. And I think, I don't know, I hope you guys see what I mean when if anyone in chat has seen Bluey, I hope you will back me up on this. That like Bluey might actually be like really effective, if not anarchist propaganda, then at least like libertarian socialist propaganda. It's a model of the family that feels utopian and in opposition to all of the worst aspects of our culture. Juniper Berry says, "Oh God, timeout sucks so much. I had undiagnosed ADHD as a child. It was like, oops, you did a bad thing. Time for immense mental torture. Actually, hell, I preferred the spoon." I don't know what the spoon refers to, but it sounds awful, and like just the I'm getting horror story vibes from the way Juniper Berry said that. Mowgli says, "How evolved is the family, though? Some kind of familial bond is surely inherent to our species, but the nuclear family, with all its authoritarian elements, pretty sure that's a cultural thing." Mowgli brings up a good point. This is part of the problem. Like, I think thing is, I think we've had some version of society for a very long time. Like chimpanzees have some version of society. Like we have been recognizing each other as individuals and like forming alliances and making enemies. And like I think politics is I think by a good definition of politics might be older than language itself. And I think chimpanzees might arguably, like chimpanzees have probably, it seems to me like chimpanzees have gone to war with each other. Like that there are factions of chimpanzees that can carry out genocide against each other. The shit I've heard about what chimpanzees do to each other is pretty fucking brutal. Yeah, the Gombe chimpanzee war. Mark knows what I'm talking about. So if we've been evolving society for that long, then we probably like family has definitely been evolving even longer, especially like the parent-child bond has been evolving for a very long time, and I think it's probably evolved specifically to be like hierarchical. Like I think children have evolved to have a certain inherent level of trust in and obedience towards whatever adult figures in their life are keeping them safe and feeding them. And yeah, I think that the biggest challenge to anarchism is what do you do about that? Like what does good anarchist child rearing look like? Because I feel like if you can solve that, I feel like all of the political questions of anarchism almost solve themselves. Like that is the hardest type of hierarchy to abolish. And it is the hardest type of hierarchy to like it's the most prone to abuse too. Probably the most abusive, oppressive. Like I'm gonna sound a little bit like an anarchist who wants to abolish bedtimes right now. Let me back up. Okay, to any anarchists who think I'm not really an anarchist, I think we should actually abolish bedtimes. Why do we have bedtimes? I had a really, really hard time sleeping when I was a kid, when I was told to sleep. You can't just decide to fall asleep. It does actually feel slightly inhumane to me to, like try to make a child be asleep whether they want to or not. Like I might unironically be in favor. I might not be an anarchist. I might not feel comfortable self-describing as an anarchist because I think they're hell, I might be a global statist. I might be a globalist and a statist because I think there should be a global government that should force everyone to get vaccinated at gunpoint. But I also think we should abolish bedtimes. I do agree with anarchists about the abolish bedtimes thing.
I mean, it looks like the whole thing was built.
Geometry says, fun fact, it's actually worse for your sleep to try to force yourself to sleep when you can't. I was diagnosed a little while ago with non-24-hour sleep-wake disorder. I have like a diagnosable, pretty bad actually sleep disorder. And yeah, I know this. You speak the truth. I can confirm this from direct experience. Trying to force yourself to sleep doesn't really work. Bedtimes kind of suck. Achamo says, I wish more stores were open at 4 in the morning. I have done an embarrassing amount of my shopping at 7-Eleven because 7-Eleven was the only place nearby that was open when I was awake for many days. Many of my days have been like that. Ivy Jack says, been just listening while cooking for a bit, but I wanted to run over to the PC and say the nuclear family is imposed so heavily because it's the best way to control individuals and large groups. the nuclear family is stupid. Like, I think I am probably in favor of abolishing the nuclear family, or at the very least, I want to construct our society so that, like, I want different models of parenting to be more common. I don't know exactly what I want. Raising children sounds hard. Raising children sounds really hard, and I don't quite know how I think it should be done. But I think that might actually be a good place to start for, like, developing a political theory. Like, if you can figure out if you can figure out the ideal way to raise children, if you can decide, I think this method of child rearing is probably the best, like, this probably produces the happiest, most productive, least traumatized, most well-adjusted children, then, like, if you can come up with that, and if you have evidence for that, and if you feel like you have solid footing for that belief, then you can start to ask, okay, what societal structures most enable that particular type of child rearing? Like, I feel like if you start with child rearing and work outwards, I don't know, I have a feeling that might be an effective way to develop a more or less comprehensive political theory.
Can you look at it? Can you look at it now?
I think this might be a good time to wrap the stream up.